We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. The Governess's Protector. Chapter 1. The Governesses, the Marks of Violence. Thornfield Castle dominated the Yorkshire countryside with its imposing mass, its grey stone towers outlined against the winter sky of February 1852. In this ancestral residence reigned an iron discipline under the authority of Duke Edmund Blackwood, a 42-year-old man renowned for his justice but also for his severity. Widowed for 5 years, he was raising his daughter Victoria, aged 8, alone with the help of a governess he had hired the previous year. Miss Charlotte Fairfax had arrived at the castle recommended by a reputable London agency. At 26, this young woman with chestnut hair and green eyes possessed an excellent education and spoke fluent French, Italian, and German. Her discretion and competence had quickly made her a respected member of the staff, and little Victoria had become attached to her with touching affection. That morning, Edmund was crossing the great hall when he glimpsed Charlotte descending the main staircase holding Victoria by the hand. The child was chattering joyfully about her piano lesson, but Edmund noticed that the governess seemed strangely stiff in her movements. She wore a navy blue wool dress with a high collar, perfectly proper, but something in her gait caught the Duke's attention. "Miss Fairfax," he said, approaching, "how are my daughter's studies progressing?" "Very well, Your Grace," Charlotte replied with a respectful curtsy. "Lady Victoria shows excellent aptitude for music and languages." "Papa," exclaimed the child, running toward her father, "Miss Charlotte is teaching me to say good morning in Italian. Listen, buongiorno." Edmund smiled at his daughter, but his gaze instinctively returned to the governess. Something in Charlotte's expression worried him. Her eyes, usually lively and intelligent, seemed veiled by a sadness she was trying to conceal. "Miss Fairfax," he said, "might you have a minute? I would like to discuss Victoria's curriculum." Charlotte nodded, but Edmund noticed she carefully avoided direct eye contact. "Of course, Your Grace. Victoria, go see Mrs. Hartwell in the kitchens. She has prepared biscuits for you." The child ran off, and Edmund found himself alone with the governess in the great hall. The morning light filtering through the tall windows illuminated Charlotte's face, and it was then that Edmund glimpsed what had unconsciously alarmed him: a slight purplish bruise near her left temple, skillfully hidden under a lock of hair, and a small cut at the corner of her lips. "Miss Fairfax," he said in a suddenly graver voice, "what happened to your face?" Charlotte instinctively brought her hand to her temple, blushing violently. "It's nothing, Your Grace. I fell last night while going to the village. It was dark and—" "You fell?" Edmund frowned. The explanation didn't convince him. Those marks didn't resemble those of an accidental fall. "What exactly did you fall on?" "A stone, Your Grace, a stone on the path." Charlotte's voice trembled slightly, and she kept her eyes obstinately lowered. Edmund observed her attentively. As a local magistrate, he had learned to recognize the signs of violence, and what he saw on his governess's face didn't match the story of a fall. The bruise had the characteristic shape of a punch, and the cut on her lips suggested violent impact. "Miss Fairfax," he said with gentleness but firmness, "who did this to you?" Charlotte's head snapped up, her green eyes bright with contained tears. "No one, Your Grace. I assure you that." "Miss Fairfax?" Edmund interrupted in a tone that brooked no contradiction. "I may only be a country duke, but I've sat long enough in court to recognize the marks of a blow when I see them. Now tell me the truth. Who struck you?" The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Charlotte seemed to struggle internally, torn between fear and the desire to confide. Finally, tears overflowed and rolled down her cheeks. "It's my brother, your Grace," she murmured in a broken voice. "Thomas. He lives in the village, and when he drinks... Your brother beats you." Edmund's voice had become glacial. "He has difficulties, your Grace. Since he returned from the colonial wars, he's not the same man. Alcohol makes him violent, and since I live with him when I'm not at the castle—" "You live with him?" Edmund was incredulous. "But Miss Fairfax, you have apartments here. Why do you return to the village?" Charlotte was now openly sobbing. "Because he's all the family I have left, your Grace. Our parents are dead, and despite his problems, he's my brother. I cannot abandon him." "But he can abandon you to his fists." Anger was rising in the Duke's voice. "Miss Fairfax, look at me." Charlotte raised eyes reddened by tears to him. Edmund read deep distress there, but also that absurd family loyalty that often pushes victims to protect their tormentors. "Does your brother habitually strike you?" "Only when he drinks, your Grace, and only since his return from the army. Before, he was a good man." "That excuses nothing," Edmund said firmly. "A man who strikes a woman for whatever reason is a coward and a criminal." "Oh, no, your Grace, please don't say that. Thomas was wounded in the war, in his mind. He can no longer control himself when—" "Miss Fairfax," Edmund interrupted, "listen to me carefully. You will immediately have your things prepared and move permanently into your apartments at the castle. You will not return to your brother's house again." "But your Grace, I cannot. Who will take care of him? And besides, what will people say in the village if—" "I don't care what they say in the village," Edmund cut short. "And as for your brother, if he needs help, we'll provide it, but not at the price of your safety." Charlotte looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and terror. "Your Grace, you don't understand. Thomas, he has a violent temper when crossed. If you intervene, if he dares make the slightest gesture toward you or toward this castle, he'll have to deal with me," Edmund said in a tone that left no room for doubt. "And believe me, Miss Fairfax, no one in this county has any interest in defying the Duke of Thornfield. Lead. What the Duke would do in the following hours would indeed shock the entire household and reveal an aspect of his personality that few people suspected. Beneath the disciplined aristocrat hid a man capable of fierce protection toward those under his responsibility." Chapter 2. The Confrontation. That very afternoon, Edmund summoned his trusted men to his study: James Morrison, his steward, and William Hartwell, the estate's gamekeeper, a former sergeant in the British Army who had converted to civilian life after losing a leg at Waterloo. "Gentlemen," Edmund said, closing the door behind them, "I need your advice in a delicate matter." Morrison, a distinguished-looking man of 50, and Hartwell, 45, his face marked by military campaigns, took seats in the leather armchairs facing the ducal desk. "It concerns our governess, Miss Fairfax," Edmund continued. "Her brother beats her. I saw the marks this morning." The two men exchanged a knowing look. Morrison sighed. "We suspected as much, Your Grace. Several servants have noticed her. Bruises these past weeks." "And no one told me?" Edmund's voice was dangerously calm. "Miss Fairfax begged Mrs. Henderson not to say anything," Morrison explained. "She feared losing her position if you learned of her family situation." "Thomas Fairfax," Hartwell growled. "I know him, a veteran of the Afghan wars like many others. The war broke his mind. He drinks at the pub every night and picks fights with everyone. That may explain his violence. But it doesn't excuse it," Edmund said firmly. "I've ordered Miss Fairfax to move permanently into the castle, but I fear her brother might attempt something." "What do you intend to do, Your Grace?" Morrison asked. Edmund rose and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. He reflected for a moment before turning back to his two men. "I'm going to speak with him." man to man. Your Grace, De Morrison protested. It's unthinkable. You cannot go to a village pub to confront a violent drunkard. And why not? Because I'm a duke. My title gives me responsibilities, Morrison, not privileges that exempt me from protecting those who depend on me. Hartwell leaned forward. Your Grace, allow me to accompany you. Thomas Fairfax has a bad reputation. He won't hesitate to fight, even against a duke. Precisely, Edmund said with a smile that was anything but friendly. It's time someone reminded him of certain rules of civility. An hour later, Edmund descended into the castle courtyard, dressed not in his usual gentleman's attire, but in a simple wool coat and riding boots. Hartwell waited for him near the horses. Your Grace, the former sergeant said, I hope you know what you're getting into. Thomas Fairfax may only be a peasant, but he's a former soldier who survived 3 campaigns. And I survived Eton and Oxford, Edmund replied with irony, not to mention a few years of French boxing during my grand tour in Europe. They rode to the village of Thornfield, a small hamlet of a few stone houses dominated by the White Hart Inn, an establishment where the village men gathered to drink and play cards. When Edmund pushed open the inn door, conversations immediately ceased. About 15 men were seated at tables, and all instantly recognized their lord. Never, in living memory, had a Duke of Thornfield set foot in this tavern. Thomas Fairfax, Edmund said in a voice that carried throughout the room, I wish to speak with you. A man slowly rose from the back of the room. In his 30s, broad-shouldered, his face marked by alcohol and violence, he stared at Edmund with a mixture of insolence and mistrust. What does his Grace want with me? He said, in a deliberately disrespectful tone. Edmund advanced toward him, ignoring the murmurs of the clientele. I want to speak to you about your sister. Charlotte, Thomas sneered. What has that little precious done now? Has she complained about me to her master? She complained about nothing, but I have eyes to see the marks you leave on her. A deathly silence fell over the inn. Thomas turned scarlet, understanding that his violence was now publicly known. What happens in my family is my business alone, he growled. Charlotte is my sister. I do with her what I want. Wrong, Edmund said calmly, removing his gloves. Miss Fairfax is employed in my house. She is under my protection, and no one, do you hear me clearly, no one touches someone who is under my protection. Thomas stepped forward, fists clenched. You think you can impress me with your title? You're nothing but a little lord of nothing who's never worked with his hands. Perhaps, Edmund said calmly, but I know how to fight. What followed deeply shocked the assembly. Thomas rushed at the Duke with a roar of anger, but Edmund met him with a right hook that sent him to the floor. The former soldier got up, shook his head, and charged again, but Edmund dodged and delivered an uppercut that made him stagger. You beat your sister, Edmund said through gritted teeth, a defenseless woman. Let's see now how you fare against someone your own size. The fight lasted several minutes. Thomas was strong and experienced, but Edmund was faster and better trained. When it was all over, Thomas lay on the ground, his nose bleeding and his eye blackened. Edmund leaned toward him. If you approach your sister again, if you attempt to enter my lands, if you threaten her in any way whatsoever, I'll return. And next time, I won't be so lenient. Is that clear? Thomas spat blood and nodded. Edmund straightened up, put his gloves back on, and turned to the stunned assembly. Gentlemen, I hope you all understand that violence against women is not tolerated anywhere in my domain. Good evening. And with those words, the Duke of Thornfield left the inn under the amazed gazes of all the villagers, leaving behind a definitively subdued Thomas Fairfax and a reputation that would make the rounds of the county. Chapter 3. The consequences of a gesture. The next morning, the entire castle buzzed with news of the previous evening's exploit. The servants, who had learned the news from the stable hands returning from the village, looked at their master with a mixture of admiration and incredulity. They had never imagined that the distinguished Duke Edmund could fight in a village tavern to defend their governess. Charlotte Fairfax was in a state of complete upheaval. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, had informed her of the events, and the young woman didn't know whether she should be grateful or terrified of the possible consequences. Edmund summoned her to his study around 10 o'clock. When she knocked at the door, she was literally trembling. "Enter, Miss Fairfax," he said in a gentle voice. Charlotte entered the study, head bowed and curtsied. "Your Grace, I don't know how to thank you, but at the same time—" "Sit down," Edmund said, indicating an armchair, "and look at me." Charlotte raised eyes still marked by bruises to him, but where now shone infinite gratitude mixed with worry. "Miss Fairfax, I hope you understand that what happened yesterday was necessary. Your brother had to understand that his violence was no longer tolerated. Yes, Your Grace, and now Thomas will be furious. He might seek revenge and—" "He will do nothing," Edmund said firmly. "I give you my word that you are safe. And besides, I've made certain arrangements." "Which ones, Your Grace?" "I sent Morrison to see your brother this morning with a proposition. We're going to finance his establishment in another county far from here, where he can start his life over. And we'll also pay for his treatment with a doctor specialized in mental disorders caused by war." Charlotte looked at him with stupefaction. You would do that? After what he did to me?" "Miss Fairfax, I am not a vengeful man. Your brother is ill. But that doesn't justify his brutalizing you. By removing him and providing him with help, we solve the problem without destroying a life." "And if he refuses?" "He will accept," Edmund said with assurance. "Morrison can be very persuasive when necessary." Charlotte burst into tears, but this time they were tears of relief. "Your Grace, no one has ever done so much for me. I don't know how to thank you." "By continuing to be the excellent governess that you are," Edmund said simply, "and by never again returning to a situation where someone can harm you." "Your Grace," Charlotte said hesitantly, "may I ask why you took such risks for me? After all, I'm only an employee." Edmund looked at her for a long time before answering. "Miss Fairfax, my wife died 5 years ago. Since then, I've been raising my daughter alone. You're not just an employee, you're the person who cares for what I hold most precious in the world. But beyond that—" He paused, searching for his words. "Beyond that, you are a person of value. Intelligent, cultured, devoted. No one deserves to be treated as your brother treated you, regardless of their social rank." "Your Grace," Charlotte murmured, "And besides," Edmund added with a smile that softened his usually severe features, "Victoria adores you. If something happened to you, I believe she would never forgive me." As if he had called her, little Victoria burst into the study, followed by a Mrs. Henderson obviously overwhelmed by events. "Forgive me, Your Grace," said the head governess, but Lady Victoria insisted on. "Papa!" exclaimed the child, throwing herself into her father's arms. "Mrs. Henderson told me you saved Miss Charlotte. Is it true you fought like a knight?" Edmund cast a reproving glance toward Mrs. Henderson, who blushed. "The servants talk a great deal," he said sharply, "but Papa, it's magnificent. Just like in the stories Miss Charlotte tells me." The governess, despite her emotions, couldn't help but smile at the child's enthusiasm. "Victoria," Edmund said, taking his daughter on his knees, "what happened yesterday wasn't a game. It was something serious. Sometimes adults must do difficult things to protect the people they love." "And do you love Miss Charlotte?" the child asked innocently. This direct question made both adults blush. Edmund searched for his words, suddenly conscious that his visceral reaction to the violence suffered by the governess perhaps exceeded the simple feelings of an employer protecting his people. "Miss Charlotte is very important to our family," he finally said, "and one always protects important people." Charlotte, who had grasped the implication, lowered her eyes, troubled. She too had become aware that the Duke's passionate intervention perhaps revealed deeper feelings than she dared hope. "Miss Charlotte," Victoria said, turning to her governess, "now that Papa has saved you, you'll never leave again, will you?" "No, my dear," Charlotte replied softly. "I won't leave any more." But meeting Edmund's gaze, she understood that her promise to the child perhaps engaged more than her simple presence at the castle. The protection so courageously offered by the Duke opened the way to something deeper, more lasting. And for the first time in months, Charlotte Fairfax felt not only safe, but also loved. Chapter 4. Love Born from Protection. The weeks following Edmund's intervention gradually transformed the castle's atmosphere. Thomas Fairfax had accepted the Duke's proposition and had left to settle in Derbyshire, where Morrison had arranged his placement on a farm while organising regular consultations with a military doctor. Charlotte, freed from the fear that had inhabited her for months, gradually regained her natural serenity. Edmund observed this transformation with satisfaction that exceeded simple relief at having solved a problem. He discovered in Charlotte a rich and complex personality that anguish had long masked. Her lessons with Victoria took on a more joyful dimension. Her conversations with other servants revealed a delicate sense of humour, and her very presence seemed to bring new warmth to the castle's vast salons. One March evening, as a snowstorm raged over Yorkshire, Edmund was working late in his library when he heard footsteps in the corridor. Intrigued because all the servants should have been abed at this hour, he cracked open his door and glimpsed Charlotte heading toward the wing where Victoria's apartments were located. "Miss Fairfax?" he called softly. "Is there a problem?" Charlotte turned around, a candle in her hand. She wore a white wool dressing gown that made her appear very young in the flickering light. "Forgive me, Your Grace. Victoria has been having nightmares since the storm began. I wanted to make sure she was sleeping well." "I'll accompany you," Edmund said, leaving the library. "I confess I worry too when she's disturbed." They walked side by side through the silent corridors, their steps muffled by the thick Persian carpets. The intimacy of this nocturnal walk created a particular atmosphere between them, very different from their usual formal interactions. "Miss Fairfax," Edmund said in a low voice, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Your Grace." "Are you happy here? I mean, truly happy now that your difficulties with your brother are resolved?" Charlotte stopped and turned to him. In the candlelight, her green eyes shone with an emotion she no longer sought to conceal. "Happier than I have ever been, Your Grace, and I owe that happiness entirely to you." "No," Edmund said softly, "that happiness you've earned through your courage, your devotion, your kindness. I simply cleared away the obstacles." "Your Grace," Charlotte murmured, "may I tell you something I would never have dared express before?" "I'm listening." "What you did for me. Fighting to defend my honor, arranging a new life for Thomas, treating me with such respect and generosity. No man had ever done that, and I fear my gratitude has become something deeper." This confession, uttered in the muffled silence of the sleeping castle, struck Edmund like a blow to the heart. He too had become aware that his feelings toward Charlotte far exceeded those of an employer protecting an employee. For weeks, he had been seeking pretexts to see her, constantly inquiring about her welfare, and catching himself thinking of her at moments when his thoughts should have been occupied with estate business. "Charlotte," he said, abandoning for the first time the conventions of their relationship, "you mustn't feel obligated to." "It's not about obligation," she interrupted with a firmness that surprised him. "It's about what I truly feel. Your Grace. Edmund, I believe I've fallen in love with you." This declaration, so direct and so courageous, overwhelmed Edmund. In a world where women of his rank never dared express their feelings so frankly, Charlotte offered him her sincerity with disarming simplicity. "Charlotte," he said, placing his hand on hers, "I too feel for you emotions that exceed everything I had imagined possible." They looked at each other for a long time in the candlelight, each measuring the importance of this moment. Then Edmund leaned toward her and kissed her tenderly, a gentle and respectful kiss that sealed the transformation of their relationship. "But Charlotte," he said, stepping back slightly, "you must understand the implications of what's happening between us. I am a duke. You are a governess. Society. Society can think what it wants," Charlotte said, with a determination that astonished even her. "You taught me that sometimes one must defy conventions to protect what is important. Well, what is growing between us is important to me. To me as well," Edmund admitted, "more important than all the prejudices in the world." At that moment, a small sound made them turn around. Victoria stood in the crack of her door, eyes wide. "Papa, Miss Charlotte, are you kissing?" The two adults blushed, caught in the act by the child they had come to see. "Victoria," Edmund began, "does that mean Miss Charlotte is going to become my new mama?" the child asked, with the direct innocence of her 8 years. Charlotte and Edmund exchanged a complicit glance. The child's question, so simple and so natural, perfectly summarized their secret hopes. "Would that mean you would be happy?" Edmund asked his daughter gently. "Oh, yes!" Victoria exclaimed, clapping her hands. "Miss Charlotte is the kindest person in the world, and besides, she knows how to tell wonderful stories." "Then," Edmund said, looking at Charlotte, "Miss Charlotte and I will have to discuss this possibility very seriously." "It's already all discussed," Charlotte said with a radiant smile. "If you want me, Edmund, as a wife and as a mother for Victoria, then my answer is yes." 6 months later, the marriage of Duke Edmund Blackwood to Miss Charlotte Fairfax caused a sensation throughout Yorkshire. Not so much because of the difference in rank between the spouses, for Edmund was respected for his justice and kindness, but because the story of their meeting had become legendary in the region. People told how the Duke had gone to fight in a village tavern to defend his governess, how he had organized the rehabilitation of her violent brother, and how this act of protection had revealed true love. "Do you know," Charlotte said to Edmund on their wedding evening, as they danced in the castle's great salon, "that if Thomas hadn't struck me that day, we might have continued to interact politely, without ever discovering what we felt for each other. Destiny sometimes has strange ways of opening our eyes," Edmund replied, holding her close. "But I prefer to think our love would have eventually been born anyway. Goodness always recognizes goodness, and love always finds its way." And in the years that followed, Edmund and Charlotte Blackwood became an example for the entire region of what a marriage could be when founded on true love, mutual respect, and the courage to defy conventions, to protect what truly matters. Victoria, who became their daughter to both, grew up surrounded by this affection and learned very early that true nobility doesn't reside in titles, but in the capacity to love and protect those entrusted to our care.